Hey, welcome to Before the Borders, episode 2. All right. Why indigenous history had to be erased. You can't justify conquest if the people you conquered have history. This is Before the Borders, and tonight we're talking about erasure, not ignorance.
Before the lie was told, before the flag was planted, before violence was blessed and called destiny, before colonizers arrived claiming new land with old blood on their hands, before survival meant fighting extinction, this land was not discovered, it was invaded. This is Before the Borders.
Welcome back to Before the Borders. All right. Hey, like, share, comment, questions. You know what I mean? For those that was here last week, for those that have seen how it's been going throughout the week, this topic is something that needs to be spoken about. You got people coming up here talking about some of the Native Americans are Asian. We're gonna get right into it. All right. Tonight we're talking about erasure. Erasure, not ignorance. Erasure versus ignorance. Get that definition of erasure. All right. So this erasure, an act or instance of erasing. So it's the act of erasing something, right? Go to ignorance. Ignorance, the state or fact of being ignorant, lack of knowledge, education, or awareness. So you should ask yourself, what happened to the Native American Indians? Was it ignorance or was it erasure? Was there an intent to erase the history and the knowledge of who a certain people was, or was it ignorance? Was it done by mistake? We're going to deal with that. We're going to deal with that because the indigenous history had to be erased. It had to be. Just like the Mexican history, the so-called Mexicans, the so-called Venezuelans, so-called Puerto Ricans, the so-called Colombians, the so-called Cubans, so-called Dominicans, who the white man calls Hispanic indigenous, their history had to be erased. It's a reason. It's a reason why they erased the so-called African American history. So here Before the Borders, we're going to get into it. All right? So let's dive into it. Let's get number 3. So we got books for those that don't read. Apparently people don't read no more. This is crazy. People don't read. I pull out books and all of a sudden, nobody believes in history now. So this book in particular, The Lost Tribes Found, Israelite Indians and Religious Nationalism in Early America. This is page 22, chapter 1. Friends of Zion. Watch this. In copious footnotes, she explained that the first group of indigenous people described, whom she compared to Carthaginians because they practiced human sacrifice, were the Nahua peoples of the Aztec Triple Alliance. The second, whom she depicted as gentle worshippers of an unknown god, were the Andean peoples of the Inca Empire. Her description of both these groups fit a common, though not universal, Christian assessment of the peoples that variously called heathens or pagans. According to this view, all humans had vague knowledge of God, whose powerful hand unseen sustained them, but tended to elaborate on their knowledge with increasingly perverse ceremonies that could end in the blood of human sacrifices. The third group, however, was different. These were the indigenous nations of North America, then in closest contact with the United States. such as the Lenape, Delaware, Muskogee, Creek, Cherokee, and I don't know how to say the H word, Iroquois. These nations, she argued, practiced ceremonies in which she trained with the trained eye could see through glimmering tradition. The smothered coals scattered from Jewish altars, that is the religion of ancient Israel. So what are they doing? They're comparing the tribes, North America, South America. You got the Incas, the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the so-called Native Indians of North America. Things that they noticed within the tribes. The North American Indians, their ceremonies resembled a lot of those of the Bible, the Israelites of the Bible. Watch this. The idea that indigenous people were Israelites, while not a majority position in the early United States, overall had more support among those who, like Sojourner, dedicated themselves to what historians have called the benevolent empire of Protestant reform organizations. This empire, we're on page 23, interconnected voluntary societies had an outsized influence on the early American literature and news media. Watch this, we're gonna go down. Matter of fact, we're gonna start at although Jedediah Morse, a Congregationalist, geographer and textbook author, was skeptical of the idea. He allowed in his 1789 American Geography that it is the opinion of many learned men, supported by several well-established facts, that the Indians of America are remains of the 10 tribes of Israel. What is going on here? This history is in these books that they tell us not to read. Because you want to hide something from a Negro or a Native American or Hispanic, what do? You put it in a book. So we're going to keep reading. We're going to jump down. A new system. A new system of modern geography listing reasons to believe there was a connection between Israelites and indigenous people before concluding the subject is curious and deserves further investigation. So you had these white folk saying the comparison of the Native American Indians and the Israelites deserve more investigation. Why? Because they resembled the Israelites. The customs, the heritage, the feast days, all the things that they were doing resembled the Israelites of the Bible. Now, how would a people that, according to the white man, were savages, didn't know how to read, didn't know how to bathe, walked around naked, didn't know Christianity, didn't know the Bible, didn't have a God? How are these same people now being connected to the Israelites of the Bible? We're gonna keep going. Watch this. Here we go. Missionaries too often proclaimed support for the idea in letters and diaries that was subsequently published in missionary journals. Missionaries going into Christianity. Christianity knows who the Israelites are. Christianity is a part of the erasure movement, not ignorance. They know who the so-called Native Americans are. They know who we are. Letters and diaries that was subsequently published in missionary journals and literature, as with an 1824 letter in which the missionary Galvin Cushman wrote, "I think there is much reason to believe the Choctaws are the descendants of Abraham." Wait a minute. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, 12 tribes. This is in the history books. With those authorities lending credence to Israelite Indian stories, pro-reform newspapers tended to treat them as plausible at least. Thus, the Philadelphia Recorder, a missionary newspaper, published a piece in 1826 claiming that a seminal leader's speech so resembled the story of Jacob and Esau that it must be a piece of circumstantial testimony in favor of the opinion that the savages of our country are descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. The history is right here. The white man is telling you, you so-called Native American Indians, you are actually the Israelites. Why indigenous history had to be erased? This wasn't forgotten history. It was removed. They don't forget who you are. They just removed it from your memory. Ignorance is accidental. Erasure is intent. I want y'all to remember that. Remember that. I'm gonna go to the Bible because the Bible is the true book, is your history book, you so-called Native American Indians. The Bible is your history book. The Bible talks about you, talks about how you got here, talks about why you're here, and the end times of what's gonna happen to the people that enslaved us. It's Isaiah chapter 29, verse 13. Wherefore the Lord said, for as much as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me. When you understand the history of our forefathers, they knew they was Israelites. Our chiefs, our ancestors, our mothers, our elders, they knew they were Israelites. What happened? And the fear towards me is taught by the precept of man. So now we call ourselves Native American. Now we say the Bible is a white man's book. Now we say we're from Asia. Yeah, somebody said that the Native Americans came from Asia through the Bering Strait. That's crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea what you're talking about. Watch this. We're going to get some more. We're going to get some more. All right. Let's go to page. Is this? Let's see. Same book, right? Yep. We'll go to chapter 4, page 118. Israelite stories and the Cherokee claims to Christianity. What's this? This is page 118. It says, along with stories about the three beings above, Sanders' account also highlighted stories that fulfill reformers' expectation that the descendants of Israelites would remember God's name. To make this connection, however, he had to smooth over discrepancies in those stories. Sanders claimed in his summary that the most sacred name of God is Yehovah. The hymn called Yahweh is sung to Yehovah. This summary made the identification between Yehovah and the Christian God seem transparent. The story he based this assertion on, however, was somewhat different. Nuxawi related that Yehovah was a great king. He was a man and yet was a spirit. The song or hymn called Yahweh was sung to him. His name must never be mentioned only by persons selected and by them only on the Sabbath day. Wait a minute. How did, you're talking about the Cherokee Indians. How do they know about the Sabbath day? And that they will only worship on the Sabbath day. Let's see. According to this story, Buttrick wrote that God, this Yahweh, commanded them to rest from all work every seventh day. His crossing out emphasized the ambivalence around the identity of Yahweh in Nutsawi's account. To him, Yahweh could be a king, by which Buttrick meant the title more normally translated as chief, who was a man and yet a spirit. But Buttrick hesitated, lifting his pen and crossing out the word God, rather than claim as divine a figure that Nusawi seemed to think as of a human ruler. To Buttrick, humans and God were distinct beings, combined only in the unique case of Jesus. To Nusawi, raised in a traditional Cherokee world populated by multiple kinds of powerful beings, the categories of man and spirit were likely more fluid. What you gotta understand what what's his name? Nusawi was saying. He was saying that man can be God. Let's get that in Psalms 83. Let's get that. Or Psalms 82. This is Psalms chapter 82 and verse 6. I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. The white man said no. That's why the white man crossed out God. He said, no, man and spirit cannot also be a God, except for the story of Jesus. But what did the natives know? The Sabbath day. We understood that on the Sabbath day was the every what? Seventh day. The white man changed it to now the seventh day is a Sunday. Made no sense. Our ancestors knew who they were. Renaming isn't neutral. It's strategic. Renaming is strategic. Renaming is strategic. We're going to pull up some more. The Old Canon and the New World. We got books for y'all. We got history books. Old Canaan in a New World. Native Americans and the Lost Tribes of Israel. Native Americans and the Lost Tribes of Israel. This account is from the 1800s. We're going to go to page 1. Page 1. Introduction. In the beginning, Lost Tribes, New Worlds, and the Perils of History. I want to read the whole thing. Let's just read it. In May of 1803, Dr. Benjamin Rush, acting as medical advisor for the Lewis and Clark expedition, produced a list of questions for Meriwether Lewis to consider when encountering Native American populations in the Western Territories. The list appears in Rush's commonplace book, as well as in a more extensive list of questions prepared by William Clark in 1804. It is divided into 3 categories: physical history and medicine, morals, and religion. And it evinces a wide-ranging proto-anthropological curiosity. Rush asked Lewis to record information about everything from illnesses to marital age to diet and the use of intoxicating substances among Native Americans. What does this say? The white man researched you. The white man researched us. Why would they research us if we was nothing? Why would they research us if we meant nothing? They know who you are. They researched you down to the T of who you are, down to the DNA of who you are. They know. We're going to get back to the book. One of his most targeted questions, however, is reserved for religion. What affinity, Rush asks, exists between Native American religious ceremonies and those of the Jews? What? Why would they continue to compare the Native American Indians to the Jews? What is so important about knowing the similarity between the two? What is it? Why are they doing such extensive research to compare the Native American Indians to the Jewish people? Why? That's because they know who you are. They know the real Jews were in America, so-called America. In the Bible, it's called Arsareth. We're going to get that again. Although question might jangle in the ear of a 21st century reader, it probably struck Lewis as neither odd nor out of place. Indeed, Clark retained a version of the query a year later. In his master list of ethnographic questions, what affinity is there, Clark writes, between their religious ceremonies and those of the ancient Jews? Ancient Jews. We talk about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, 12 tribes, Moses, Peter, Paul. That's what we talk about. First, it suggests that he did not merely copy out Rush's questions, but revised them as he prepared his own guide for the expedition. Second, and more crucial for the purposes of this study, it reveals this question's investment in a long-standing discussion of the origins of indigenous American peoples. Specifically, Rush's inquiry and Clark's revision demonstrated an interest in what I will refer to in this book as the Hebraic Indian theory. The notion that indigenous Americans might be, in part or in whole, descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. When he asked Lewis to look for traces of Jewish practices across the American landscape, page 2, Rush did not have contemporary Judaism or actual Jewish people in mind. As Clark recognizes, Rush's inquiry reaches instead for evidence of a past predating the development of the religion now called Judaism. Let's go in there. So this guy says, I have to compare the ancient Israelites to the Native American Indians, not the so-called Jewish today, because they don't resemble the Israelites. Matter of fact, let's get that in the Bible. Revelation chapter 2. They don't resemble the ancient Israelites. The white Jewish man does not resemble the ancient Israelites. That's why when they came to Arsareth, America, they said we have to compare these Native Indians not to modern day Judaism, but to a predated religion of the ancient Israelites. Why? If think about it, if the so-called Jewish man today were the real Jew, why couldn't they compare the Native American to them? They only could compare the Native American to those that predated Judaism. Because the people that's calling themselves Jewish are not the real Jews. The Native Americans, you are the real Jew. You are the real Israelite. That's who you are. It's the book of Revelation, chapter 2, and verse 9. I know thy works, and tribulation, and poverty, but thou art rich. And under the blasphemy, the lies, the disgusting lie of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. The synagogue of Satan. Let's jump over to the next chapter. Chapter 3, verse 9. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. Let's get back to the books. I want to read that again because that was some heavy stuff. We're going to go back to page 2. I'm going to read that again. Read that again. Rush does not have contemporary Judaism or actual Jewish people in mind. As Clark recognizes, Rush's inquiry reaches instead for evidence of a past predating the development of the religion now called Judaism. Rush seeks the kingdom of Israel, which disappeared around 722 BCE, and which might, his question hopefully indicates, be on the verge of reappearance in the Americas. This white man know the reappearance of the Israelites will be right here in America. Let's get that. Hosea. We'll get down in Hosea, chapter 1 and verse 10. Watch this. The white man know the reappearance of the Israelites will be right here in America. Hosea 1 and verse 10. Yet the number of the children of Israel should be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass, that in the place where it was said unto them, you are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, you are the sons of the living God. Right here in America. Right here. The white man said, you ain't God's people. We know who you are. But what we did, indigenous erasure. And what is it? Indigenous erasure? They knew it was intent. It was no ignorance in renaming you. There was no ignorance in destroying your people. It was no ignorance in murdering and robbing and raping. There was no ignorance in that. It was intent. The intent was that you never rise up. You always remember who your God is. And they say your God is a white man. They say, I'm your God. You are no longer Jew. How all this history? This is hundreds of years. Last week went over 200 years. We're bringing out history now today that it's been well over 200 years that they have researched who you are. Specifically what your religion is. Specifically what your divinity is. What is your belief in God? And they determined that you predate Judaism and you can be related to the ancient Israelites. They said that. So what should you be calling yourself? Let's get back to the book. In asking Lewis and Clark to determine whether Native American cultures demonstrated affinity with Judaism, Rush actually sought answers to two questions, one ancient, the other modern. These questions emerged in different historical periods, but over the course of the early modern era, they became intertwined. The Puritan Edward Winslow summarizes the convergence of these questions in his 1649 work, going back to the 1600s. The Glorious Progress of the Gospel Amongst the Indians in New England, and perhaps the most concise summary of Christian investment in the Hebraic Indian theory. Winslow writes, there are two great questions which have much troubled ancient and modern writers and men of great depth and ability to resolve. The first, what became of the 10 tribes of Israel that were carried into captivity by the king of Syria, when their own country and cities were planted and filled with strangers? The second is, what family, tribe, kindred, or people it was that first planted and afterwards filled that vast and long unknown country of America. This is crazy. Winslow's hope is that England's colonial efforts have revealed a single answer to both questions. It is not least probable that these Indians should come from the stock of Abraham than sick any other nation this day known in the world. He writes, I mean, this was written in the 1600s. They know your history better than you know your history. Especially considering the juncture of time wherein God hath opened their hearts to entertain the gospel. Where are the lost tribes? In America. And who are the original Americans? The lost tribes. The work of communicating and increasing the light of the gospel, Winslow asserts, is glorious in reference to Jews and Gentiles. Watch this. If the lost tribes are the indigenous peoples of America, then the arrival of English Protestants in the Bibles bears the promise of biblical prophecy. What better justification of settler colonialism could there be than the conversion of a lost biblical population to Christianity? As Rushwood nearly 2 centuries later, Winslow hopes to demonstrate that imperial endeavors may have providential consequences. What is he saying? He's saying, Deuteronomy 28. This is what he's saying. He said, if these people are the lost tribes of Israel, then us coming over here and colonizing this area called Arsareth that we're going to name America is biblical prophecies. That's what he's saying. To convert them to Christianity. Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28 and verse 64. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood, Christianity, and stone, Islam. This is the proof that the Bible is a true book. That colonialism, erasure, happened because of our sins. That's why erasure is here. If the past is wrong, the present narrative collapses. And if the narrative collapses, so does moral authority. That means they don't have no authority. No way the same people that colonized you has the authority of your history, has the authority to rewrite your history. No, no, no. All right. This is the Indian removal and the decline of American Hebraism. Chapter 5, page 142. James Fenimore Cooper's late novel, The Bee Hunter, or The Oak Openings, 1848. But we started at 1600, now we are 1800. Has fallen both out of print and off the critical radar. Set in the territory of Michigan in the early days of the War of 1812. This novel tells the story of Benjamin Bowdoin, a man whose exceptional moral character is surpassed only by his ability to observe the flight paths of bees. Bowdoin's solitary life of honey harvesting is disrupted when local Native American populations begin choosing sides in the unfolding conflict. Further complication arises from Bowdoin's budding relationship with the Marjorie, the charming sister of a drunkard named Goshen Waring, who befriends the reluctant bee hunter and throws his life into disarray. We're going to jump down. So it's going to this guy who wrote a book about the bee hunting. Let's go to page 143. We'll go to page 143. At the bottom. Here we go. Bowdoin's frontier geometry operates in direct opposition to the one taught by Parson, a man who configures Native Americans as returning to rather than receding from sight. The Bee Hunter is thus Cooper's most explicit response to the Hebraic Indian theory. And in this book that he wrote is actually talking about the Hebraic Indian theory. As a man is a forceful proponent of it, his expression of the theory is typical of his 19th century versions, particularly those circulating among evangelical, Christians, drawn on biblical prophecies apparently linking the discovery of the lost tribes to the return of Christ. Hold up. How does identifying who the lost tribes are, how does that become a link to the return of Christ? Watch this. amen, holds that once Native Americans remember their true history, the stage will be set for millennium. Although God's action has placed the kingdom of Israel out of sight, amen, contends, human faith in the tribes' continued existence and a corresponding willingness to look for them bear the potential to set an ancient prophecy in motion. We just read in the Hebrews, Hosea 1 and 10. The lost tribe's location operates as a unique and as yet undiscovered geographic site where human agency has the potential to combine with the divine intent and fully sync sacred and profane time. The white men know we can't let these guys know who they are. They linked the awakening of the Israelites to the return of Christ. They linked the Native Americans realizing who they are to the return of Christ. Redemption, salvation, and destruction for those that erased your history. They know that. We just read the history of why they have to erase your history. We read the history because they linked your awakening to the return of Christ. Yes. They are linking our awakening to the return of Christ. We just read in the Hebrews chapter 1. I keep saying Hebrews. Hosea chapter 1. Matter of fact, let's go back because we didn't finish that. We didn't finish that in Hosea chapter 1. Hosea chapter 1, we're going to read verse 10 and verse 11 together. Yet the number of the children of Israel, this is verse 10, shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, you are the sons of the living God. That's verse 11. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together. Who's the children of Judah? The so-called Negroes in America, the so-called Haitians, Jamaicans, West Indies, the so-called blacks. The prophecy is that the indigenous people of the land and the so-called blacks of the land will come together, will unite under who? Under Jesus the Christ. We will awake and start what? Start linking our history with the Bible. Hold up, wait a minute. Deuteronomy, Revelations 2, Hosea chapter 1. What's going on here? And what is that going to do? That's going to spark the return of Christ. The white man wrote it in the 1600s. He wrote it in the 1600s. In the 1600s, he said we have to make sure that these Native Americans don't realize who they are, because when they wake up, when the Native Americans wake up, who God calls God, when they wake up, is linked to the return of Jesus Christ. We're going to finish verse 11. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together, and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come out of the land, America, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Great shall be the day of our salvation. If the past is wrong, and the present narrative collapses, and if the narrative collapses, so does moral authority. So does moral authority. So, why does this still matter? Why does this still matter? We're going to show you why it still matters. You got it up? Okay. Trump orders removal or changing of Native American signage at National Park. This is February 1st. This is today. Posted today. Bighorn County. The Trump administration has flagged 2 exhibits at Montana's Little Bighorn National Monument as non-compliant, targeting displays that honor tribal sacrifices and reflect on the historic battle known as Custer's Last Stand. Who's Custer? A white man. Evil white man. The order follows President Trump's promise to restore truth and sanity to American history, but critics view it as an attempt to silence important indigenous perspectives from the nation's historical narrative. At Little Bighorn, scroll down. At Little Bighorn Battlefield, where history runs deep in the valley where the famous battle occurred, the controversy has stirred strong emotions among Native American community members. Everything with the battle, where it happened, it was here in this valley where it happened. Kiana Kachara, who works at the Custer Battlefield Trading Post, said Sunday, for Kachara, the history of the Little Bighorn Battlefield is deeply personal. Without those teachings, Without these teachings, I wouldn't know who I was. It's only recently that I've started to get more to my identity as a Native person, as an Indigenous person, Couture said. The Trump administration's move targets signals describing broken promises to Native American tribes and references to the loss of Indigenous culture and language under boarding school systems. What is Trump doing? Trump is erasing your history. Intentively, purposely. Not doing it by mistake. Why does Indigenous history has to be erased? This is the question you should ask yourself. You should ask yourself, why are they trying so strongly to erase Indigenous history? You know who else history they're trying to erase? African Americans. Slavery. They're trying to erase who else history? They're trying to erase Mexican history. That's why they say we need to deport all illegals out of America. The same people that's writing those bills and laws are the same people that are immigrants. How can an immigrant invade your land and now you're the immigrant? And they're hyping up everybody to join ICE. Hell, they give you a $50,000 bonus to join ICE. To do what? To deport God's people. But the Lord said it was going to happen. The Lord said it was going to happen. Let's get that. Hosea 5:15. It's Hosea chapter 5 verse 15. The Lord said, I will go and return to my place till they acknowledge their offense and seek my face. In their affliction, they will seek me early. This is what we must do. We must repent as the Israelite. Our history was purposely erased. Not ignorantly, but purposely. All right? This is what you got to understand. We got to come back to the laws of God. This is before the borders, but you got to understand, who are we before the borders? And why does Indigenous history have to be erased? History did not start with colonization. It started long before the borders. This is before the borders, and the remnant will remember.